It's always a bit of a head-scratcher to think about how the people who brought Socrates to trial. Socrates criticizes natural philosophers, the sophists, and religious fanatics who only adhere to God. He earned the enmity of many people. Protagoras, a contemporary, was also a sophist, but Socrates wasn't satisfied. To say that man is the measure of all things implies that everything is relative, which leaves no absolute truth or absolute virtue. But even someone who was as well regarded as Socrates was likely to have some enemies. Because if your daily routine consists of going to the agora, the marketplaces, and constantly engaging people in discussions about politics, ethics, and religion, you're bound to clash with some folks.
Welcome to Philosophy, Science, and Beyond, a place where curiosity meets knowledge.
Politics and religion, in particular, turned out to be the main reasons behind Socrates' execution. Adding to that, the fact that controversial figures like Alcibiades and Critias, who weren't exactly popular at the time, were constantly seen by Socrates' side, certainly didn't help his reputation. These individuals would go on to create deep problems in Athens, and unfortunately, Socrates would be portrayed as partly to blame. Socrates was already a famous man during his life, and this level of renown is something that very few people achieve. The lasting impact he had while alive only grew after his death, and he became known not just in Greek lands, but around the entire world. In fact, whether you're interested in philosophy or not, you've probably heard his name. As the saying goes, the horse dies, the field remains. The brave man dies, the fame remains. Socrates might be dead, but he made such a name for himself that the whole world has heard his wisdom. In that case, one can't help but agree with Montaigne, who said that it is not a great thing to live. Servants and animals also live, but to die honestly, intelligently, and with a strong heart is a great thing. The reasons for Socrates' lasting fame are diverse. Firstly, he was one of the first thinkers to shift his focus away from the natural world and instead focus on the human condition. And while Xenophon dabbled in some social philosophy, Socrates was really the first. Secondly, Socrates was quite the skilled speaker, allowing him to make a great impact in a relatively short period. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, such a charismatic, respected, and well-known man was executed. While there were other philosophers who had faced trials for their ideas, none had been put to death. Socrates holds the distinction of being the first philosopher killed for his beliefs. Before his execution, Socrates had faced many difficulties in the streets of Athens. It's a common belief that people almost worshipped Socrates, only to have a few people rise up and kill him. While that's generally true, it doesn't paint the whole picture. The reality is that while Socrates was alive, he was often mocked and made fun of. There were many people who were bothered by his very existence, not just his fans. Since he was a naturally outspoken person, this led to some serious consequences. Some people went as far as tearing their hair, kicking him, and despising and belittling him. Socrates responded by saying, "You can humiliate a person." Now, the man being discussed here is not just anyone. For this reason, this account will try to be very organized and thoughtful. To make this account comprehensive, all the readings done in the past have been revisited. The goal is to convey Socrates' importance correctly and completely. The works of significant writers like Xenophon, Plato, Laertius, and Nietzsche about Socrates will be presented in an organized and correct manner, like a historian of philosophy in the style of Aristotle, by adding personal insights into the matter. Let's begin by looking at what Athens was like in 399 BC, the year of Socrates' execution. This era was the most vibrant in the city's history, mainly because of a successful democratic leader named Pericles. Pericles created a very open environment for discussion for artists and thinkers, which attracted many talented people from all over the Greek world. For instance, Anaxagoras came from Clazomenae, but after arriving in Athens he was tried and exiled, although he could not have known that the situation would later turn so sour. Later on, Protagoras came from Abdera and was accused of being irreligious. While he was trying to escape from Athens by ship to avoid being tried, the ship sank and he died. So, there were groups trying to disrupt the liberal environment started by Pericles, sometimes for religious and sometimes for political reasons. In such a setting, it was possible for great statesmen, thinkers, religious leaders, and many others to be mocked through a literary genre known as comedy. What set Athens apart was the agora, a central location where all kinds of topics could be discussed freely, from philosophy to religion, from politics to art. As shown in the photo, the agora held a strategic position in city planning. It was mainly a center for trade. People went there not to philosophize all day long, but to conduct business and keep the economy running. But when philosophers like Socrates, sophists like Xenophon and Hippias, and artists like Phidias and Aristophanes came to this common meeting place, it became a vibrant and festive environment. As the saying goes, where the nightingale sings, there is festivity. The city of Athens was divided into neighborhoods called demas, from which the word democracy is derived. The word demos refers to ordinary people. In Rome, they would later be called plebs, the working class, like slaves. Socrates, who ignored his father's sculpting profession to go to the agora every day and talk from morning to evening, was an ordinary person from the Alapegedeme. He didn't have any noble rights and lacked political connections. Aside from his connections with his well-to-do friends, he met in the agora. Fortunately, because of his skill in speaking, he met with leaders such as Pericles and bureaucrats like Charides, who was Plato's uncle, and significantly influenced them. This city was his whole world. Aside from leaving for a few wars in his youth and traveling to cities such as Delphi and Isthmus, he never left Athens. Over time, as his circle of friends grew, so did the number of people who were hostile to him. Aristophanes, who had long discussions with Socrates about love in the Symposium dialogue, wrote a comedy called The Clouds, which ironically included the very reasons why Socrates was executed. In The Clouds, Socrates is portrayed as a bad teacher who leads young people to rebel against their fathers and corrupts their morals, and as a cunning sophist who spreads dangerous ideas that could undermine the state. Considering that comedy at the time was similar to cinema films today, you can imagine how damaging this would be for Socrates' reputation. Consider a man who defends his beliefs throughout his life, and even as he is about to die, he doesn't back down and never shows cowardice. While it might seem easy to do this in a story, very few people have been able to overcome their fears and remain composed when facing the execution platform. Socrates, with his strong character, never gave up his beliefs and maintained his dignity even as he was dying. Although his character was appreciated after his death, Socrates lived with courage and virtue while he was alive. Perhaps his greatest act of courage was his attempt to completely challenge the status quo and his view of himself as a gadfly to the Athenians. You know how annoying a gadfly is. It's no problem when it flies around other people's butts, but when it comes buzzing around your own, it starts to feel very irritating. Perhaps the following words that Socrates said when he was about to die explain it well. "You may think that I am mocking you. You may not believe me. But if I tell you that it is the greatest blessing for a person to talk about virtue and the subtlety of discussion when examining myself and others, and about other issues you have heard with your own ears, you will be even less convinced if I say that an unexamined life is not worth living." It appears he was not able to convince them. In fact, when we consider many philosophers throughout history, it's hard to find a correlation between their philosophy and their lives. This lack of consistency is actually quite disturbing. You can't help but think, what good is it to read someone who is not consistent with themselves? For example, imagine someone who talks about morality all day long, but at night they would do anything for money. In such a case, is that person's real value morality or money? If you listen, it sounds like morality, but in reality the answer is money. What that person actually cares about is money. Socrates, on the other hand, believed in justice and courage, and remarkably, he maintained these values until his last breath. Even as he was dying, he didn't beg for mercy. And this determination angered the judges so much that even those who had voted for his innocence changed their minds and voted for his execution. If we give a similar example, Galileo was also tried for his beliefs. In court, he confessed what he was asked to say to save his life. According to the story, before he died, he said, "Eppur si muove," which means, "yet it moves." The comparison is not really fair, though. Galileo was tried for a physical theory, and it makes sense that he didn't want to die over it. He could have been wrong, and even if the theory wasn't accepted back then, it would be in the future anyway, which he knew. Socrates' situation is different. He wasn't killed for a scientific theory, but for moral and religious reasons. Therefore, the most virtuous thing to do would have been to die for his beliefs. Zoroaster was expelled from his homeland because of his religious beliefs, and he expressed his resentment, asking, "Which lands shall I flee to? Where shall I flee to? They have taken me away from the nobles and my peers. I am neither pleased with these people, nor with the lying rulers of these lands. How can I please you, O Ahura Mazda?" After this brief overview, the focus will now shift to Socrates' philosophy and the impact it had. Let's dig deeper into what we've discussed so far, and look at Socrates as a human being with his real relationships and his actual environment. According to Xenophon, there were two main reasons why Socrates was tried. The first was that Socrates didn't believe in the gods the state believed in and wanted to introduce new ones. The second reason was that Socrates was trying to corrupt the morals of the youth. Xenophon goes on to try to refute these accusations. Where did they get the idea that Socrates didn't believe in the state's gods? He was often seen sacrificing at the public altars of the city. And he also consulted prophecies. The main source of the misunderstanding about Socrates was his frequent talks about his personal daimon, or inner guiding spirit. According to him, this daimon guided him in all kinds of dilemmas and crises. While the Greeks at the time believed everyone had their own personal guardian daimon, Socrates' idea that this daimon was a power that guided you meant something different. It seemed to imply that he saw that daimon as a god. To clarify, the idea of a personal spirit isn't exclusive to the Greeks. It existed in Zoroastrianism long before. These personal guardian angels were called Fravahar. According to this belief, not only humans, but every being in the universe had their own guardian Fravahar. To assume that this belief, just like in the Orphic belief, was transferred from the East to the Greek world is not insignificant. Similar to how the cult of Mithra in Persian lands was later adopted in Rome and formed the religion of Mithraism, culture and civilization were transferred from Iran and India to Greek lands throughout history. The Orphic culture in Greece, or the cult of Orpheus, included the belief in reincarnation, which even philosophers such as Pythagoras subscribed to. This is actually a belief from India. The Zoroastrian belief in a guardian spirit or guardian power could be seen as another transfer of the Zoroastrian tradition. The fact that the first Greek philosophers, such as Thales and Pythagoras, traveled to cultural and civilizational areas such as Egypt and Babylon supports this idea. The Fravahar, or guardian angels, were a revolutionary belief for people at that time. When Socrates spoke of a guardian god, the religious authorities of the time understood this as a sin and even idolatry, for which he was ultimately executed. Xenophon, however, tries to defend Socrates, stating he was saying that his daimon was guiding him. I think the accusation of introducing new gods stems from this. However, he was not doing anything different from those who believed in prophecy and consulted bird omens, seers' words, signs, and sacrifices. Socrates was neither an unbeliever nor someone who believed blindly. He had a simple belief in the existence of gods. He believed that we need gods and prophecy at points where we can't find the answer by reason. For example, when we go to war, we don't know which side will win. And when we get married, we don't know whether the marriage will be good or not. He continues to think that those who only act with reason in such matters must have lost their minds. According to him, this first stage is a part of human life, and these issues cannot be solved with reason. The second stage of Socrates' belief is that we do not need gods in situations where we can find the answers with reason. He believed that a person who still relies on the gods, even when they have the answer, has also lost their mind. For example, if we want to drive a car, the way to do it is clear. If we want to launch a rocket into space, would it help to burn incense or offer prayers during its construction? Therefore, Socrates had a measured approach in his beliefs, as in all other areas of his life. But did fanatical religious people see it this way? If Socrates says that we do not need to consult gods at points where we can reach with reason, how would a fanatic interpret it? As blasphemy. Socrates sought to combine religion and reason, and he paid for it with his life. Do religion and science contradict each other? Yes, they do. Socrates was a naturally outspoken person. He immediately said what he believed and openly expressed what he thought. Because of this, he faced the backlash of not only the Athenian Democrats, but also the Sophists. The Sophists were interested in both society and politics, and they also wondered about the secrets of the universe. Socrates, on the other hand, thought this was foolish. When celestial events were the topic, his religious side took over, and he stated that he wouldn't be able to know anything about these issues. This aspect of Socrates is a major setback for the history of science. If people acted with such an understanding, the fields of cosmology, astronomy, and even physics would never have emerged. However, with enough observation and experimentation, we have learned countless new things about matter and dark energy. There are reasons why Socrates thought like this. He wanted to put humans at the center, not nature. He spoke as though he was making fun of those who were interested in subjects other than humans. Do those who think they know enough about human-related issues eventually start to be interested in such issues? Or do those who leave aside human issues and investigate divine issues think they are doing the right thing? Socrates criticizes natural philosophers, the sophists, and religious fanatics who only adhere to God. He earned the enmity of many people. Protagoras, a contemporary, was also a sophist, but Socrates wasn't satisfied. To say that man is the measure of all things implies that everything is relative, which leaves no absolute truth or absolute virtue. Natural philosophers said that nature is the measure of all things. But what is nature? Everyone has a different idea of what it is. For example, Parmenides said that everything and all nature is one, and that change isn't possible, while Heraclitus said that nothing exists and that everything is constantly changing. Democritus said that there are a large number of beings, but didn't try to prove Heraclitus wrong. Therefore, focusing on nature should have been a futile endeavor. With this in mind, Socrates created a philosophy centered on the belief in God and the individual, focusing on morality, wisdom, virtue, and piety. He thought natural theories were unnecessary. His philosophy is focused on good and bad things in people's lives. Socrates also wanted to emphasize that people are responsible to God through his religion-focused thoughts. Xenophon tried to make this point many times in his defense of Socrates. When we look at the second accusation, the idea that Socrates was trying to corrupt the youth, Xenophon says that this was also an unfounded accusation. I think it's also surprising that they believe that Socrates led young people astray. First of all, apart from what has been said above, he was the most self-controlled of all people in terms of sexual relations and gluttony. Then, he was extremely resistant to cold, heat, and all kinds of fatigue. He had become so accustomed to being content with little that he could easily be satisfied with very little. How could he have made others enemies of the law, gluttonous, prone to sexual relations, or intolerant of fatigue when he was so disciplined. Actually, the accusation was entirely politically motivated. Everyone who knew Socrates knew that he wasn't someone who created immorality. Socrates believed that people with the ability to govern the state should govern. When selecting a captain for a ship, we want to select the most skilled and experienced person. Similarly, the plumber we call to fix a tap should be the most skilled person in the area. It would follow that the people we choose to govern the state should be experienced and innately talented. Appointing administrators randomly is foolish. When the Athenian Democrats heard these words, they thought that Socrates was encouraging young people to oppose the laws, making him a traitor. Some bureaucrats, such as Critias and Alcibiades, who were thought of as traitors, also stayed close to Socrates. Critias was the most ruthless ruler during the regime of the 30 established after Athens was defeated by the Spartans. Alcibiades later betrayed his homeland. Thus, Socrates suffered. But was it Socrates who made them greedy? Or were they like that all along? Were there attempts to be close to Socrates in effort to learn morality and virtue? Or were they simply getting free political education? These people stayed near Socrates for a while, but when they were finished with him, they didn't even look at him. Alcibiades was young and handsome, and Socrates liked that, which is a well-known fact. It is also clear that Socrates is one of the most influential people in world history, but there's no need to put him on a pedestal. To really understand Socrates, you have to see him within the context of his times. There is an English saying, "Never meet your hero," which applies here. Because he was of plebeian origin, he lacked a proper education. Yes, he was brilliant, but it's hard not to think, I wish he'd also gotten some math and physics education. He was hostile toward the natural sciences and treated art and culture as enemies, which is narrow-minded, even if it is Socrates. He had a measured approach to his own religious beliefs, which was admirable, and what distanced him from religious bigotry. But just as he thought that it was unnecessary to investigate the existence of gods, he also thought that astronomical observations were unnecessary. You wouldn't be surprised to hear such things from some people today, but it's surprising coming from Socrates. We call him a sage, even the greatest sage, yet this is his opinion. Still, we should not be hasty in judging Socrates because his philosophy is individualistic. He made rules for himself, not for a certain community, and he adhered to his rules until the end of his life. He believed that astronomical knowledge might be somewhat necessary for finding your way at night, but you can simply ask the sailors about that. His philosophy was focused on competence and merit, but also on obedience. This competence was important when it was useful for people. For example, if geometry helps to distribute land fairly, it should be learned. But delving into theoretical topics beyond that is a waste of human life. The real question is, do you need to go to school to learn geometry to divide land fairly, or can you learn it yourself? Of course you can learn it yourself. Socrates graduated from the school of life. He didn't like physics and astronomy much and didn't study them. He also disliked art and culture and especially hated tragedy. This might be why Aristophanes, one of the greatest tragedy writers, mocked him in The Frogs and the Clouds, portraying him as an unnecessary person. Socrates was uneducated, and he was quite ugly, with a crooked nose, thick lips, and bulging eyes. He might have been the ugliest person of his time. Many people made fun of him because of this, but he didn't pay much attention, and even joked about his own appearance. His ugliness was unique and is something that needs to be understood. Almost everyone who wrote about him dedicated a section to his ugliness. Nietzsche wants to draw a different meaning from his ugliness, going so far as to see him as decadent and a corrupter. He uses the Latin saying, monstrum in fronte, monstrum in animo, which means a monster in the face, a monster in the soul, to describe Socrates. Socrates was a man of virtue and morality, but what morality did he adhere to? Was he a modern Heraclitus with a whip, punishing people at random? Socrates was a master of dialectics. He reasoned, debated ideas, and argued rather than writing them down. Nietzsche has written beautiful works, but he also created an army of those who feel wounded and are outliers in society, those who despise and see them as slaves. Considering Socrates was an ordinary pleb, the reason for Nietzsche's hatred becomes clearer. Is it the common people? This is dangerous territory that we should be careful about. We shouldn't exalt the people over all else because we still need workers to grow our food. Socrates' philosophy was rooted in real life. In his view, knowledge and philosophy were good only if they were useful for life. Natural philosophers thought that life was meant to gain knowledge, whereas Socrates thought that gaining knowledge was for life. They shouldn't only understand how to live, because to know also means to start being moral. Without knowledge, there will be evil and immorality. Socrates believed that no one could knowingly do evil. So what should we do to gain knowledge? We should question everything. Every kind of axiology, which comes from the Greek words axia and logos, refers to one of the three main research topics of philosophy: morality and aesthetics. Axia means value, while logos means research subject, science, mind, word, etc. Axiological investigation explores what is valuable. It's divided into two, morality and aesthetics. When we ask what is moral, we are also asking what is virtuous, which is a proper way of living. When we ask what is aesthetic, we are also asking what is beautiful and what is ugly, which is part of Socrates' philosophy. These topics require a great deal of discussion. Socrates was the first Greek philosopher to systematically question these issues. He had a lot of work to do, going around talking to everyone he saw on the streets, in the squares, and in the agora. He quickly showed everyone that they were mistaken or wrong. Socrates started to compare his own wisdom to that of others. He went to a statesman who claimed to be a sage, and through discussion, proved that he was not actually a sage. In this way, Socrates earned the hatred of almost everyone. There is a passage in his defense, saying, "I went to one of those who considered himself a sage and asked the oracle, 'This man is wiser than me, yet you said that I am the wisest of men.' I wanted to question the prophecy by asking this question." The Athenians researched this man, and I got the impression that he seemed wise to many people, especially to himself, but he was not wise. Then, Socrates tried to show that he was not wise, even though he thought he was. He made that man and most of those there his enemies. Leaving there, Socrates thought, "I am wiser than this man. Neither of us knows anything about beauty and goodness, but he thinks he knows something, while I know nothing." Imagine this man killed at 70, spent his entire life having these discussions and making countless personal enemies. At a certain point, parents began to worry about their children because Socrates' discussions were so strange and dangerous. With so many people slandering him, you might say this man wanted to bring about his own end. When the jurors asked him to propose a penalty during his trial, he made them even angrier. He wanted to die. If he had lived longer, the 70-year-old wouldn't be able to do philosophy as before, but if he was killed, the impact of his philosophy would prove to be true. Socrates tried his whole life to do what was right and lawful. Even when he was alone, he defended what was just, and he was willing to give his life for this cause. Xenophon wrote that Socrates could have survived the trial if he had been willing to negotiate. Many people at the time were acquitted by negotiating in court, sometimes with exile and sometimes with a fine. But Socrates chose to die, adhering to the laws rather than living by acting against the law. The leader of this group is a young man named Melitus, who wanted to shine by playing a kind of savior role in this case. He intended to shine by eliminating enemies of religion like Socrates. Before the trial, Socrates meets Euthyphro on the road, who is someone who cares about matters of conscience and religion. Euthyphro was also there for a case. He was suing his own father. Euthyphro's father had killed someone, and Euthyphro thought his father should be punished. When Euthyphro sees Socrates there, he thinks that Socrates must also be there for a case. Socrates said that his case was a public matter, inciting the public to hatred and hostility. although Euthyphro was surprised because Socrates wouldn't normally sue anyone. It must be that someone had sued him. At the beginning of the dialogue, they had the following conversation. Euthyphro, what are you saying? He must have made an accusation against someone, because I can't imagine you being able to accuse someone else. When Socrates says that someone had sued him, Euthyphro asks who. Socrates didn't know Meletus, the plaintiff, very well. I don't know him very well either. Euthyphro, he must be young and unknown. I think his name is Meletus, from the Pithos Demi. Is he long, straight hair, sparse beard, aquiline nose? No one knew who this Meletus was. The accusation he makes is quite significant, and he will cause the death of the greatest sage of the time. Meletus made a serious accusation that Socrates corrupted the youth and tried to undermine the foundations of the state. Socrates is remarkably composed in the face of these accusations, and it's surprising that Meletus is dealing with such big issues. If he really cared about the foundations of the state, and if Socrates was really trying to undermine them, then what Meletus was trying to do was politically correct, right? If Socrates really was leading the youth astray, then he needed to be stopped as soon as possible. As the dialogue continues, Socrates, how serious was the accusation? I think it is not a small thing that he has been able to comprehend such important issues at this young age. According to what he claims, he knows how the young are led astray, and even who leads them astray. He must be a wise man. As soon as he noticed my ignorance, and that I was leading my peers astray, he went to the city to complain about me like a child running to his mother. I must admit that he has started to get involved in politics from the most correct place, because the youth should be started with in order to ensure that they are as well educated as possible in politics. Just like a good farmer takes care of the young saplings first and then the other trees. Meletus, according to what he says, is cleaning up those of us who harm the young saplings first. When he starts to deal with the old people, it will be obvious how much benefit he will be to the police. This is to be expected from a man who has started to work in this way. The accusation was based on the fact that Socrates created new gods, and that these gods were accepted as new gods, turning their backs on the old ones. Socrates constantly talked about his personal daemon, which might have been his biggest mistake, because people are quick to believe in slanders. If someone slanders another person based on flimsy evidence, the slander spreads quickly, and when enough people believe it, it becomes real in the eyes of the public. The psychology of the masses is very strange. It is not individual or rational, but driven by passion. Everything that stirs up the masses suddenly becomes real. Everyone needs to be cautious of this, but Socrates didn't pay much attention. He was outspoken, and he suffered because of it. For some thinkers, this was an amazing quality, but for the masses, it was a disaster. While Socrates' thinking group and students admired him and were willing to spend their fortunes to save him, the masses of people hated him. Outspokenness is a valuable thing at a small scale, but it is a danger at a large scale. Euthyphro tried to comfort Socrates, saying he hadn't done anything wrong and that people easily believed slanders. Euthyphro himself had experienced similar situations, being stopped by jealousy and fear. But he told Socrates that we should not pay attention to this and we should not deviate from what we know. The dialogue continues. Socrates, dear Euthyphro, being ridiculed may not be very important sometimes. As far as I am concerned, the Athenians do not care whether a person is wise or not, as long as that person does not transmit his wisdom to others. If they think that a person has the ability to make others wise, they become very angry, as you said, out of jealousy or any other reason. For Euthyphro, the situation wasn't too complicated, because he didn't talk too much. Socrates, on the other hand, talked at every opportunity and to a mainly young audience. He did this without taking any money, which was a separate problem. People who give lessons or distribute books for free are usually trying to push a certain agenda